As people work their way in, is this mic on? Can you hear me in the back? I just want to thank you again for the topic 1 discussion on those effects that matter most, the neurologically related effects that matter most. And again, to encourage you to contribute to the docket on those effects. And I'll also remind you, if you want to talk about other effects that we haven't talked about, Dr. Bracchio put up a slide recognizing that there are many effects beyond the neurological. Please feel free to comment through the docket on those if we didn't get to that, especially if you want to talk about how the effects that you talked about today stand in relationship to the other effects that you have to deal with on a day-to-day basis. We're now going to move into our second topic, which is really focused on treating and the treatment approaches. We have heard quite a bit, as the panel comments from topic 1, they worked in treatment some into their panel comments, and we got some of it. So we want to build upon that now and focus more in depth on treatment approaches, recognizing, of course, that there's probably more variability in the treatment approaches as there was in the symptoms that were discussed today. So we're going to try to work our way through this as much as to get as much common ground as we can. We're not focusing so much on particular treatments as much as to say, what is it that we hang on one second. What is it that you think is important about treatments? We have 5 panelists to kick off our discussion, very similar to the morning, representing a range of underlying IM disorders and a range of treatment experiences and perspectives. We're going to ask each of them to go through with their 3 to 4 minutes of remarks, and we will start with Melissa, please. If you can push the button on your microphone and hold it as close as possible so we can hear you well.
Hello, my name is Melissa Hogan, and I'm a parent to a 7-year-old child named Case with Hunter syndrome, or MPS II, as well as his 8 and 10-year-old brothers. I'm the founder of Saving Case and Friends, which is a Hunter Syndrome Research Foundation, and the Hunter Syndrome Research Coalition, which coordinates families and foundations to find a cure for Hunter syndrome. As a context for my perspectives on treatment, a little background on Hunter syndrome is warranted. It involves progressive physical, cognitive, and behavioral decline with an average lifespan of approximately 12 to 15 years old, untreated. At 2 years old, when Case was diagnosed, he seemed like a normal little boy with a little developmental delay and some attention issues. He laughed and sang. After diagnosis, he went on an FDA-approved enzyme replacement therapy, which involved a weekly 4-hour infusion, first in a hospital, then with a home nursing, and eventually I was trained to do his infusion at home, which has allowed much more freedom and flexibility in our lives and less medical trauma for Case, given that it is a weekly 4-hour process for the rest of his life. ERT showed positive effects that we saw because his liver and spleen reduced, he stopped falling as much while he was walking, had more energy, had more joint range of motion, was happier because I believe he was in less pain. Breathing was easier, so he also began speaking more as well. It would be great if it wasn't 4 hours or an IV infusion, but I'll take that if it means it works. Although he learned with difficulty for about a year after diagnosis, he then rapidly began losing skills. He lost 18 IQ points in 8 months. Behaviorally, he became uncontrollable at times. We had a CNA in our house 5 days a week because of aggression towards his brothers and no sense of safety. We had gates gating off all the rooms of our house. He was strapped in a pediatric wheelchair with a 6-point harness when we were in public because of lack of any sense of safety. I described the behavioral profile of Hunter syndrome as some autism, ADHD, OCD, sensory processing, no sense of safety, and aggression. His speech began to lessen to 3 to 4 word sentences from 9 words, and he began to stutter uncontrollably. He could not understand a great deal of what was said. He could not even follow one-step directions. He would easily choke on foods. But at 3.5 years old, following the 18-point loss of cognitive points, he was able to enroll in a clinical trial that puts the enzyme he is missing into his spinal fluid, initially via an intrathecal portacath, and after 18 months via lumbar punctures. He has now been receiving lumbar punctures every 4 weeks for over 2 years, with anesthesia to receive the medicine because of the failure of the initial port and delay in approval for use of the new portacath. With that being said, here's how we evaluated the decision to enroll in the trial despite the potential risk of spinal and brain complications. First was the potential for the drug. Slowing the disease would be a win. Halting the disease would be a huge win. Improvement was not even contemplated. Life is most important, and we'd take any shot at it. We evaluated this with our own reading of the research studies and speaking to other families and the PI. Second, in the evaluation was the risk of doing nothing. We knew the natural history. We had met other patients. To do nothing to us equaled death. We knew how long the drug development and clinical trials process took, and we knew this was our only shot. That's how it is for many families, and I think you would agree. The trial that the FDA is evaluating at any given time is truly the only shot many of our children have to live because these diseases are degenerative. Only third in our evaluation was the risk of the drug or the administration method. We would have signed up for close to any risk because we knew otherwise he would die a slow, difficult, and painful death. What is most important to us about a treatment? Its potential for life, survival, a chance. Then impacting other challenges, such as the behavioral aspect, the ability for him to function in public and be safe and be independent in some ways and have language. Third after that are also the medical trauma challenges, and a less invasive administration method is actually more important than the risk that it causes. How can we tell that a drug is working? Observation is the best method. Is he safe? Can he walk? Can he be independent? What ADLs does he have? And some thoughts I'd like to leave you with. Slowing or stability is a win. We don't need a normal child. We just want a living child. Next, medical trauma is significant in these children who require constant interventions, tests, treatments, and procedures. That has to be considered when you contemplate the measures for clinical trials and the administration method. Will they cooperate? Will the measure traumatize them unnecessarily? Regarding measures, cognitive testing on these children is incredibly difficult, often inaccurate, traumatizing, requires often Herculean efforts by parents with planning and rewards, and probably most importantly, excludes a large portion of the patient population because there is a short window where they are above the age where they can follow directions to test, but they have not yet lost all of their cognition. The original inclusion window for our trial was 15 points. When Case first tested, he was above the criteria, so to wait for a fall, he then fell 18 points. And had they not widened the criteria, he would have fallen completely through. Treatments and trials should be designed to be tested and used across a range of genotypes, CRIM status, and ages. The current narrow bands of eligibility and automatic exclusions for things like shunts both make enrollment difficult and do not reflect the reality of many of our communities. For example, a large portion of our community have shunts, and they are excluded in our cognitive trials. Finally, and maybe most importantly, there should be an expectation of compassionate access past the initial safety trial. Again, we just want our child to live, and any given trial or drug may be the only shot they have.
Thank you very much, Melissa. And we'll move to Dean.
Good morning, and thank you for inviting us and having this discussion. Hopefully it's beneficial to you as it is to all of us. As you've heard, the IEMs are quite distinct. We share a lot of things in common, but there's a lot of differences. The disease that I represent is metachromatic leukodystrophy. On the right-hand side of the screen there is my daughter Darcy, who passed away at age 10 after what they called a successful bone marrow transplant. She engrafted, she lived through the transplant, but she had some post-transplant rejection complications. That was in 1995. She was diagnosed because her older daughter Lindy, shown on the left there, and that's a pretty old picture. She is now 33 with the juvenile form of metachromatic leukodystrophy. She can no longer climb those stairs. She's in a wheelchair. We have to feed her. She wears diapers and so on and so forth. We're blessed in that one of our two children is still alive, but ironically, that's the one that didn't have a therapy. And would we go back and make the decision differently? I don't think so. We, like most parents, go into these trials and these potential therapies with our eyes wide open. MLD is one of many rare diseases, and much like rare diseases, about 50% of the cases of MLD are the late infantile form with an onset of 18 to 24 months, and it's fatal in those kids generally before they reach the age of 8, 9, 10 years old. So it's a very rapidly progressing disease, and we are anxious to not only have our kids thrive, but to just be alive and to be able to communicate back with us. The disease advocacy organizations are the people that know where these families are, and we're quite anxious to work with the FDA and with industry. We formed the MLD Foundation and literally travel around the world, meeting families, supporting families, but also in the background doing a lot of research work. Families care about quality of life. It's not just longevity, it's quality of life. We heard this in the first session, and the therapies that are proposed or addressed need to have that component. And respectfully, I'm a big supporter of the FDA, but the FDA model of do no harm, we need to watch with the clock that says time to death. And do no harm, as Melissa pointed out, when the outcome is death, the risk-reward benefit tables turn quite a bit. And so we're anxious for safe experimental therapies. We want to make sure they're safe. But if the worst thing that happens in a therapy is nothing, that's okay. That's a good risk for us to take because we hope and pray for the upsides. The ideal therapy would stop progression in the short term. We're seeing a lot of enzyme replacement therapies. We have an enzyme replacement therapy in clinical trial in Europe, not here in the United States. There's issues related to getting that application here. Those are things we want to talk about. There is a gene therapy combined with a bone marrow transplant that is in Italy right now, and we're seeing wonderful results, and I hope the Vivian family has an opportunity to speak in a little bit about that. Their 2 children are here, and we know there's no perfect therapy, but 3 and 4 years out, we are guardedly just blown away by the results, and we want to bring that to the U.S., and we know there are a lot of issues that need to be addressed and discussed with that. One of the things that you asked us to talk about a bit was consent. With over 50% of the MLD population being 3 or 4 years old by the time you go through the diagnostic odyssey and are considering something, those kids obviously aren't old enough to give consent. So that discussion gets deferred to the juvenile and adult forms. And I think we need to be very aware with these neurological diseases that when your cognitive abilities are impaired, you aren't necessarily the best person to give consent. And so we have to allow for the caregivers and the parents and those that can take a different perspective to be involved in that consent decision. Our 3rd clinical trial is also only in Europe. It's another gene therapy, and we're concerned that we have no clinical trials in the U.S. And just as Melissa mentioned with compassionate use, we have had numerous conversations with the folks that are making these applications, and the FDA supports compassionate use. Your rules allow that. And industry says, well, that's a good idea, but the reality is, at least with our disease, and I can't speak for others, that they aren't huge advocates of compassionate use. And the reason is not because they don't care about the kids, they don't care about these diseases. It's because the risk is too high of an adverse event in a less controlled environment, and that will mess up their clinical trial. And they have stakeholders and shareholders and all the normal corporate stuff that makes that very challenging. So it's a place where it's very, very awkward to have a 3-way conversation between advocacy groups and families, the developers of a therapy, typically academia or industry, and the FDA. And to be perfectly honest with you, as much as and I'm not here to pick on anybody, to be honest, but this meeting is of advocates, and we've got some industry in the audience. When you go back later today and tomorrow and next week, you'll have closed-door meetings with industry and with the FDA, and we won't necessarily be at that table. And we need to have this kind of open exchange consistently amongst all 3 parties, even if it's uncomfortable, because that's where all of this insight and perspective comes from. Patient-reported outcomes was discussed a little bit earlier. The world is turning on its ear. PCORI is driving a lot of this, but we as advocacy groups have been active in this for a long time. More and more data is being gathered and made available as patient-reported data. And It's not statistically valid because a nurse or somebody culled that data, but it is statistically valid because it's being reported over time by large sample sizes. So it's a different sort of validation. And I think one of the messages that we want to convey back to the FDA is that patient-reported outcomes not only are good data, but it's insightful. We'll find out how many kids have green dots on their thumbs or whatever that other thing is that's not being captured because somebody in academia didn't study it 10 or 20 years ago. And my final comment is with regard to, actually two comments. One is regard to advisory panels. We're very interested as advocacy groups in being on advisory panels, but in many cases we are conflicted out because we have an educational grant relationship with maybe with industry or something, and a stack of paperwork they sign and we sign to say there's no arm twisting, there's no leverage, there's no promotion, and yet we can't meet the SGE requirements for conflict of interest. And with an organization such as MLD and other rare diseases, we are the experts. We've seen hundreds of families and literally dozens of researchers at their homes, at their sites, and we're the experts and we can't participate. And the final thing is, what can we do for you? I sat with an FDA representative a number of years ago now, and they very casually just said back to me, well, we have all these regulations, and we respect and we like those regulations, but we are the people that can make the change. We are willing to have an act of Congress, if that's what it needs, to help change the world, which is changing with regard to therapies. And we need to know where we can help you with that. I think PDUFA 5 is indicative of those sorts of things. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Dean. And now we'll have Jennifer.
Hi, I just want to extend a thanks to the FDA and the CDR for having the opportunity to share my patient perspectives on the current approaches to treating IM. My specific connection is to PKU, diagnosis 1973. The provision of clinical care is through the University of Maryland, and in the very early years under protocol through Maryland's newborn screening program that involve intensive home visits, blood feed drawing, and dietary monitoring with provision of medical food, which is also the emphasis of my comments, but I would like to acknowledge there are some other treatments in the open dialogue session that follows. Medical food is the treatment that I depend upon to this day for health and survival to perform academically, socially, and professionally, one that spared me a lifetime of institutional care and saved my children's lives. This patient-focused dialogue offers a channel of communication that I think can be very beneficial to assure that the FDA is meeting its commitment in implementing PDUFA 5, which is why we are here today, thanks to the congressionally mandated responsibility known as FDASIA. I've been asked to address attributes of an ideal treatment. While the diet has its shortcomings, there have been milestones. And I think the FDA shares my concerns warranting a 21st century approach to nutritional management of PKU that includes access to innovations. First and foremost, the attributes, prevention. In the words of former Secretary Sebelius, preventing illnesses before they become serious and more costly to treat helps Americans of all ages stay healthier. Key congressional witness, Dr. Shurin of the CDRH at November's FDASIA hearing highlighted another key attribute, accelerated access, and reinforced the need to speed innovative new products to market without compromising safety. And in the case of PKU, unnecessary delays in affordable access to conventional treatments, game changers within the category of medical food and emerging pharmaceuticals leads to disease progression and devastating outcomes that are 100% preventable for a limited, underrepresented, underserved population as the PKU adults. In the history of biochemical genetics, there is no greater invention than treatment, which takes the form of a diet that can prevent severe, devastating neurological toxicities and virtually eliminate disease manifestations. In untreated adults, there's increase in mental illness, psychological disorders like depression and phobias, anxiety, and neurological deterioration, seizures, tremors, and paresis, hence the wheelchair. On the bottom row, or bottom corner there's a visual representation of the positive outcomes, not possible, without early and continuous treatment, but the story does not end here. Children born to pregnant women with untreated PKU have severe birth defects, microcephaly, congenital heart defects, developmental delay, and mental retardation. There is no cure. This would be ideal. Other attributes that I would look for in an ideal treatment: this is something that's personalized, given the variability of the genetic mutations in the enzyme, and consideration should be given to individual patient variables and their specific metabolic needs. This requires a multidisciplinary team approach, and maybe combination therapy that's afforded to all patients with PKU. Regardless of the treatment or the inborn error, the risk versus the benefits must be weighed, discussed with the metabolic team to ensure patients are meeting their goals and the treatment plans optimize outcomes. The FDA is a shepherd of resources, and that includes medical food. I do not want to see PKU patients handicapped anymore by an inefficient system for which medical food fits no paradigm. The incentives under PDUFA 5 need to be extended to the medical foods industry, the small business innovators who hold my lifeline. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jennifer. And now we'll move to Roy.
So I'm Roy Zagami. I've told you a little bit about my son already. He's 6 years old and has Sanfilippo syndrome. I won't dive into what that is. I think we've talked about it enough already, but I'll talk a little bit about what we're giving him today to try and manage his symptoms and what seems to work and what doesn't. One of the things that showed up in animal models was that you could give Sanfilippo mice genistein in very high doses and actually manage the underlying cause of the disease. You could reduce the substrate that was built up in the mice. And with nothing to lose, we tried genistein on our son in comparable doses to what was given in the mice. And what we saw in the period that we gave him between 3 and 4 was, just extremely rapid decline. It seemed to have no effect. We took him off. And so there was, there wasn't any assurance that this substance was helping him. And that's obviously evidence that what might work in a mouse doesn't seem to necessarily work in humans. And so we were left with treatments that basically managed his symptoms. One of the symptoms is aggression, and we give him Risperdal to manage his aggression, and we found that that made him easier to manage in school, less aggressive and less impulsive, and amitriptyline at night to help him sleep, and both of those things have been very good for him in terms of managing those particular symptoms. Now, the downside of giving him those drugs is that it makes him lethargic the next day, and so as a parent, I have to sleep, right? We have to live our lives. And so I sort of feel some guilt about giving him something that causes him to wake up a little sluggish in the morning. But it's a choice that we make because it seems to help our family live our life. And what I would like to see in terms of treatment is not just something that seems to treat the symptoms, but something that attacks the underlying cause of the disease. Sanfilippo is caused by a well-known gene defect that causes a missing enzyme that causes a well-known substrate to build up in the brain. And yet there's nothing that we can try here in the U.S. and no trials here in the U.S. to treat that. In terms of what I'd like to see, I think something that managed his hyperactivity would be excellent, something that helped him sleep without waking up the next morning feeling drugged, and something that managed his impulsive aggression. And I think managing and stabilizing his cognition, we can give him Risperdal, but that's not keeping him from slipping away from me, right? Let's see. I think a home run for me would be as if I could take my son to the grocery store and walk through the grocery store holding his hand and shopping without him ripping everything off the shelves. That would be awesome, right? I'm not expecting the kid to get a medical degree someday. I just want him to live a manageable life. And finally, I just want to talk a little bit about consent. I think there may be a perception among the scientific and regulatory community that patients need tons of data. And what I would say is that the average run-of-the-mill parent is not going to be able to look at some animal data around longevity or whether they can swim through a maze or something like that and make a decision about treating their son. They're going to trust what the doctors tell them, right? And so I would avoid just releasing tons of data to patients. I think it needs to be boiled down by the sponsor and by the industry sponsor and the doctor that's running the trial, and that needs to be boiled down to simple language that parents can understand. One of my concerns is that we don't necessarily want to create huge hurdles either for opportunities to try treatments. One of the things that we see in Sanfilippo, there is no newborn screening for Sanfilippo. And so every kid that goes into the trial is symptomatic. By definition, they've been found, unless they're a younger sibling of a parent that got, or an older child that got diagnosed, they by definition have symptoms, and that's why they were found. And yet treatment might work differently in a symptomatic patient than in a newborn. And yet I don't want to wait for animal data that says, yes, this treatment works in newborns. I mean, the way every industry sponsor is going to test a drug, they're going to get an animal model, they're going to test it on newborns, and there's some sign of efficacy and proof of safety. That's enough for me, because the option of not doing anything is certain. It's a death sentence, right? And we absolutely need trials in the U.S. There's an intrathecal ERT trial similar to what Melissa talked about, and the company, the sponsor, couldn't get it opened up in the U.S. And we tried everything from moving to Europe, asking for compassionate access, and there's just no opportunity, and that's a hopeless feeling as a parent. I think we want some reasonable idea of safety, but I don't think we necessarily need proof of efficacy before we try something in a phase 1/2 trial. I know that this is a shocking thing probably for most people to hear, but my son may live 10 more years if we don't treat him, but his quality of life is rapidly decreasing. And I think if I tried something today with a reasonable belief in doing my homework that it might help him, and he died, I would know that I died trying, and that would be something that I could live with. And I want that chance to try for my son. And I know that I respect you guys so much for what you deal with, because no one's ever happy with the FDA, probably. People complain if you let something go through that shouldn't. And, we want you to move faster. And, I think our job as patient advocates is to make our perspective clear on these catastrophic diseases. We need to go to Congress. We need to give you guys air cover to let you know that you can move as fast as possible, so that you guys don't have the fear of being dragged up in front of Congress. And that's our job, and we're going to continue to do that. And I think one of the brightest spots of hope for us in the Sanfilippo community, above the ERTs that are being developed, is gene therapy. And in terms of what might be very interesting to see in a consent form, one of the therapies that's being developed is being done right here at Nationwide, and they're using an AAV9 vector. And yet they're using that same vector for SMA, for other diseases, and maybe there's safety data from those other trials, and maybe that data could go into the consent form. And I don't know whether that safety data translates, but I think that's very interesting information, and maybe maybe that could translate to some degree. So, thank you.
You finished?
Yes.
Sorry. Thank you very much, Roy. And finally, we will have Andrea.
Hello, my name is Andrea Smith, and I have a 6-year-old daughter, Katie, who was diagnosed with an inborn error of metabolism. She has a Mealy's-like syndrome and was recently also diagnosed with type B pyruvate carboxylase. Katie has low tone and transient muscle weakness. She rarely sleeps, has severe temperature dysregulation, gut dysmobility, and has seizures. When we received Katie's diagnosis, we worked with a pediatric psychiatrist named Dr. Stanley Greenspan and moved to Bethesda. We're originally from Texas. She's also being treated at Johns Hopkins and Columbia University. Katie has a sweet disposition and is well behaved, but she does experience extreme anxiety as she does not understand why her body receives several different messages. Dr. Greenspan taught us how to cell regulate her by carefully monitoring on a daily basis and working with her doing something called floor time. It's basically a play therapy to keep her emotionally regulated, to take her to higher levels of thinking and understanding the world around her. It is very successful as we continue to do floor time. Since the first year of her life, she has received speech therapy, physical therapy, and occupational therapy. We spend more than the average family on food and antioxidants. Now that we have learned that her IM takes so much work for her to convert nutrients into energy, we are constantly trying new things that she eats, things that we've noticed that work or don't work. We know that her cells have an impact on her ATP and her mitochondria regulatory function, which is why we believe all this expensive therapy has kept her alive. Katie maintaining cellular metabolic homeostasis is a 24/7 job for me, and is the most difficult because, well, it affects everything she does, how she feels, her seizures, her brain disorganization, her blood pressure is all over the place, and her central nervous system. She's also been taking a mitochondrial cocktail for over a year now, and we have not seen any improvement. And I asked my neurologist / geneticist, okay, well, now what? What do we do? And he said, you know what? That's the $1 million question. I get this question from everybody, and he says, I don't know what to do. You just have to treat each symptom as you know, walk this path. So I Googled some of her symptoms, and I found a wonderful organization called MitoAction, whose mission is to support those affected with an IEM or a mitochondrial disease. They don't necessarily give medical advice, but they offer practical advice for patients to manage their symptoms and family support. Also, MitoAction has helped our daughter improve her quality of life, because sometimes when I don't know what to do, there are others there along the way to hold my hand. Since there is no cure, I would want to know the modulation of her gene, or mitochondrial oxidative phosphorylation, to match the work of her ATP hydrolysis. I don't know if that makes any sense to you, but as I understand and experience what my child goes through daily, is that the food she is eating is not converting enough energy or oxygen to make proper ATP, thus enter mitochondrial dysfunction. Then this creates the whole messed up metabolic homeostasis. Are there post-translational modifications and metabolic alterations that can be adjusted? I don't know, but I'm certainly looking into it in Europe. I certainly do not want to use children as human guinea pigs. Do we continue to use experimental mice in labs? The informed consent should clearly communicate in layman's terms how long the experiment has existed, outcomes and statistics, and how many participants. Also, has the medicine been tested to rule out any damage to the mitochondria? I believe a mandatory class should be taken for a certain amount of hours for parents to complete. Do not go over the paperwork the same day in the clinic, for example. Parents need time to digest the information. A second mandatory class to ensure they understand exactly what they are committing to. There should be a Q&A day, especially put aside with the specialists who created the trial. After that, parents I believe, must have a waiting period before they sign their child up. For example, let's just say like 3 days. I'm sure for many parents, and because of their desperation, they would do anything to help their child. And my fear is they may make an emotional decision, not realizing some of the side effects and risk. In conclusion, parents of children with IEM spend a large portion of their time trying to get their medical needs met through insurance. There should be more awareness and advocating for IEMs, just like children who have cancer or leukemia.
Thank you very much, Andrea. Again, if we could give these parents and the individual living with the PKU a round of applause. We thank you very much for setting up a great foundation to a discussion. We won't be able to follow up on every point that you've made, but I think you really set the stage, explaining the range of perspectives and the range of experiences that you've had. I'm going to ask again, just so we get a sense of how many people, as you were listening out here, how many patients and caretakers heard your own perspectives or experiences shared. Anyone who has experiences or perspectives that are widely different? Okay, so it sounds like there's some common ground here, and we'll delve further into that. To start, we're going to have a polling question, just like we had in the first topic. This just gives us a sense of what your experiences are. And you're on the web, then you should have this polling question as well. What therapies have you used to manage your or your loved one's condition? And please check all that apply. Dietary restrictions, supplementation, medical foods, enzyme replacement therapies, bone marrow or organ transplantation, that's C. Other prescription medicines to help support the condition, such as anticonvulsants or psychiatric medications, non-drug treatments, such as dialysis, G-tubes, or splinting, use of assistive technologies, a broad range of them, from wheelchairs to readers, etc. Other therapies, such as behavioral, physical, speech, or occupational therapy, or something else, or none of the above, then you would mark H. Okay. Again, we have the wide range of experiences represented here. A little less experience collectively with enzyme replacement therapies and with the bone marrow transplantation for several reasons. On the web.
We have a very similar distribution on the web as well.
Okay, thank you. Okay, we're going to touch upon some of these now in more depth, and feel free to help with some follow-up questions. And we will first start with the enzyme replacement therapies. We've heard the experiences shared, and we might have heard some from topic 1. What we're really looking for in this discussion is to get at what specific neurological effects are they addressing well, and how do you know? Would anyone like to comment more on that from their experience? Yes, Steve? Oh, hang on one second.
Steve Holland, MPS 1. So my children started ERT in 1998, and at the current dosing, there's no evidence in their condition that it improves the neurologic effect of the disease. In the animal studies, they have to give like 20-fold in order to get any treatment from that. So absent doing it intrathecally, providing the enzyme that way, it's just not going to cross the blood-brain barrier under the current technology.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else want to share their experience?
And I would say one of the other things is, it's up here, Sarah, sorry.
Oh.
That CNS versus PNS and the effectiveness of enzyme therapy in both aspects of the nervous system is something that is not consistent and something we need to learn more about.
Any specific downsides of these treatments that you would like to highlight? Just the enzyme replacement therapies at this moment. Okay, we'll have Amber, and then we'll go back there.
Hi, Amber Mongan. My daughter has MPS 1. She only received enzyme therapy for about 17 weeks during the time in which she was receiving a bone marrow transplant. And the downside for us definitely was the fact that they had to access veins on a 13-month-old child every single time you went in. And even when she had the port, it was easier, but there are infusion issues. The children can take on too much fluid and then have issues with blood pressure and other concerns. And after she had her port taken out from transplant, we were back to peripheral vein use. And that was a big bummer for her. Also, a downside would be sitting for 4 to 6 hours with a 2-year-old attached to a wire in a crib that just wants to be running around and gets tangled up and they get wrapped around them. So that's not pleasant.
Thank you, Amber. Back there.
I don't have a downside to the enzyme. I have a downside to the other treatments. I don't know if you...
Okay, we'll probably get to those other treatments, and then if we don't, we'll come back to you. What's your name?
Nadia. Oh, my name's Nadia.
Nadia. Are there any questions? Okay, go ahead, Jennifer.
This, I can't really comment on a downside of the enzyme replacement therapy, because for PKU, we actually have one that's in phase 3 clinical trials right now. So that remains to be determined. But a downside For me, as far as the inclusion criteria, I've had the consent forms in my hand, but one of the criterion is looking at the phenylalanine level. And Christine mentioned in the earlier session, this is a very narrow therapeutic window, and they're looking at adults that are above 6. I don't meet that criteria because I'm stable. So it is a concern to me as we, roll out these new therapies. It's anticipated this may be something likely I'll see in the future, how you transition adults with PKU who are in stable metabolic control to an enzyme. When it doesn't really seem that that's what they're, right now they're just focusing on the levels. And we've seen that with Kuvan, FDA approved in 2007. It's used to help stimulate residual enzyme. There's different PKU, hyperphy, classical. So they might have different functioning forms of the enzyme. This is used to boost the activity as an adjunct therapy to the diet. The response can be different responses, and I think only BioMarin can probably comment better on that. But efficacy is looking at a 30% drop in the Phe levels, and I think as far as the neurocognitive effects, that's probably something still in study, but maybe they could address. But it's an ongoing process. And
Thank you, Jennifer. Any follow-up questions? Well, Melissa, go ahead.
I would just make 2 comments about downsides of ERT. The first being we had the workshop yesterday on immune tolerance, and I think that's a very important issue to continue exploring, both in intravenous ERT as well as potentially in intrathecal ERT, obviously very important to me. And the second, as I mentioned, was the medical trauma aspects of constant interventions on a weekly basis, and in clinical trials, and then with additional tests that a lot of these kids are required to undergo.
Thank you.
Just one other thing, not to state the obvious, but obviously the cost and the time that's involved, we're willing to accept those things. So it's not but the second generation small molecule taking a pill obviously would be much more preferred for all the kids on the ERT.
Thank you. We've had some discussion, I know there's some in the audience, I know Amber, I think, about bone marrow or organ transplantation. And I just wanted to spend a few minutes to follow up on if anyone wanted to share their experience. Maybe we'll ask Amber to come up and just spend a few minutes on what you saw as the effects, especially the impact it had on the neurological effects from the bone marrow transplantation.
When my daughter was diagnosed, she was 11 months old. And the reason that we found her diagnosis was not neurological really at that point. She was only 6 months old when I started questioning doctors as to what was going on with her. By 9 months, when I finally said she's not babbling, and that was a sign to me that there was something going on, then they finally started looking a little more serious at her. And throughout transplant, she still had yet to do things like walk on her own. Rolling over was still not something that she was able to do. Sitting up on her own was quite a struggle. She learned actually while she was in transplant to do this motion with her head, which was a lot of fun because then when she came down, there was a crib side that she would smack. So we had to start patting the crib for her while she went through transplant. And she wasn't speaking still yet. She learned to do the mama dada thing while she was in transplant. And so we worked a lot with all of the other therapies. The physical therapy and occupational therapy and speech therapists came in every day when we were there. And by the time she got out, she was up to being able to sign 6 words. She still was not walking on her own, but she was cruising her room for that period of time. I can't think of many other things that she gained. She really seemed like she was supposed to go through transplant. She was just much stronger when she got out. Once we got home, it was about 3 months that went by before she started walking on her own and speaking words, and she chose a good one. Block was her first word. So, yeah.
Thank you very much, Amber. So we've heard very different experiences with bone marrow transplantation. Does anyone else want to share their experience with that right here?
Hi, my name is Becky, and I'm here with my two children, Eli and Ella. Our story's a little bit different. My kids, Eli 20 months ago was diagnosed with metachromatic leukodystrophy, otherwise known as MLD. We were told basically take him home and enjoy the rest of his life because there was no real treatments for the disease. In researching, we found out that there was indeed bone marrow transplant, but after we researched more, we found out that for MLD, just this disease specific, the mortality rate was at least 40%. And in the last 20 months, we met a lot of people on Facebook and through the MLD Foundation. And anyone who has had a bone marrow transplant, they are still progressing with the disease and they are still dying. By the grace of God, we got into a clinical trial in Milan, Italy. And I lived there for 4 months with Eli last year, and he got gene therapy.
Eli's raising his hand.
Oh, yeah. Ella and I just got home about 4 weeks ago from her gene therapy. We lived there for another 4 months. She was in the hospital for 64 days. For Eli, we had to pay for everything because he was accepted out of compassion. We were going to opt to not do a transplant because of all the harmful side effects for this particular disease. As you can see, they are doing amazing. They left Milan after 4 months of being there. Neither one of them were on any drugs, no immunosuppressives, obviously, because they're using their own cells that are just manipulated. And they're both doing wonderful. And Eli was number 10 in the world, and Ella was number 11. And all I can say is I really hope, I'm not here for them because they already went through treatment. I'm here for the ones that come after them. And hopefully other people get this opportunity. Because when you talk about treatment, when Eli was diagnosed, unfortunately, the neurologist kept turning us down. There's nothing wrong, there's nothing wrong. So it also has to start there. I think that more people need to be more aware of these types of diseases because had I waited and not trusted my gut, we would have never even gotten in that trial. And then these two would be just living out the rest of their life. So I could just ask you, the FDA, and just look at these treatments as another option because there's nothing here in the United States. And I had to leave my other two kids for 8 months to live in Italy, and it's obviously affected our whole family. And but hopefully they can live, a nice life right now. So
Thank you very much, Becky. Any follow-up questions on what we've heard? Okay. Any comments from the web on these topics?
We have some comments not directly related to what we were hearing in the room, but we do have some web participants who've mentioned the issues around compassionate use of drugs, and a participant mentions the concerns about applying standard clinical trial parameters to the IEM trials. Also, some other treatments have been mentioned, such as IV pamidronate for mucolipidosis and for Gaucher. There are substrate reduction therapies, but the side effects make it very difficult for the patients.
Thank you. We've heard quite a bit about medical foods, both from Jennifer's comments and from some comments earlier with regard to medical foods and PKU. So are there any other experiences with either medical foods or other dietary supplementation that you would like to share at this point? Okay, we'll go back there first because the microphone's back there, and then we'll come up here.
Hi. The organic acidemias also thrive on the medical foods and the formula. There is a formula devised for each particular disorder that leaves out the offending amino acid or that they cannot metabolize. So for my children, isovaleric acidemia is an inability to break down leucine. So both of my children, they consume part of their diet with natural protein. My daughter, because she does not have the same neurological defects that my son has, gets her natural protein from foods, where my son gets it from a liquid premixed formula already. But they are both supplemented with the leucine-free formula that is vital to keeping them alive.
Can I ask, do you see effects? Can you see changes in their neurological symptoms and effects?
Oh, absolutely. My son not having the restricted diet at birth, along with the amino acid supplements, which is they both are on glycine and levocarnitine or levocarnitor, and that helps them to rid their body of the isovaleric acid that builds up. So since he didn't have it for the first 3.5 years before diagnosis, there were, I guess, different times where he was almost at risk. And at 18 months, he was sick. But unfortunately, when he was hospitalized, it was not discovered. No one identified the disorder, so it went undetected. But as soon as he was put on diet, he remained stable metabolically for the past 13 years. And he's had a lot of hospitalizations, 5 surgeries in the past 3 years. And so he's had a lot of critical moments. He's remained metabolically stable throughout everything. And my daughter remains on the restricted diet with the formula as well and the amino acid supplements. And she's protected. She's 11, finishing out 5th grade. If we don't maintain that status of maintaining that level with these foods, we can see her get a little lethargic and just not, as we say, they're off, as we will say, and they begin to wilt. So
Thank you so much.
Huge impact.
Right up here.
My name is Casey Connolly. I'm a lifelong PKU patient. Sorry to bug you again about PKU. I know there's a lot of patients in here.
We want to hear about PKU, of course.
So basically, PKU growing up through your childhood, the hardest thing is, being normal and being cool around other people. And growing up, eating these fake processed foods that your mom has to cook for you everywhere you go, and you have to bring a fake lunch with fake cheese to school and have kids wonder, what are you doing? Why are you eating that? It makes life growing up rather difficult. And then as getting into high school, luckily enough, my mom has been fully engulfed in the PKU community, and I was able to get into clinical trials and be able to be a testing dummy basically for Kuvan, let's say. And I did start Kuvan since I was 14, and ever since then, that's changed my life into a whole 180 because now I can eat like a straight vegetarian. And by all means, it's been one of the greatest things that I've been through in my entire life and been able to be a part of. But now it's getting through 7 years of my life where I'm still on the same drug, I'm still doing the same thing. Yeah, I have to take over 30 pills a day in order to sustain just a vegetarian diet that's consisting of carbs, fruits, and veggies. And in order to do that, I have to take 30 pills. Every meal I go to, I have to bring a bottle with me and to whip out the pills. So when I'm out with friends, if I go on a date, I got to bring my pills with me, and I got to explain the situation every single time. It gets tedious and it gets frustrating. And the problem with that is being a PKU patient. The number one thing that you need to do to stay healthy is take your medication. And when I have to take 30 pills a day, every single meal, when I have to drink formula twice a day, every single day, which consists of 500 calories per drink, which sums up to 1,000 calories a day, aka supplementing half my meals a day, which, don't get me wrong, it tastes disgusting, but I have to do it in order to move on. But that takes away a half my meals every single day of where I want to eat, a fruit salad or something delicious tasting. And so the fact that going through this, having all these steps and processes, the volume of medication that I need to take just to become a vegetarian, which I'm not even cured yet, but it's just temporary, is making my life so tedious that I'm watching my little brother go through the same thing because he does the same. He's 14 with PKU. But it makes him not want to take his medications. And because he resists doing it, of which my mom has to force it upon him, he refuses even more because he's in those teen stages where you don't want to. And when he does that, then all the symptoms come in: lack of focus, temper, I mean, when I don't take my medication in school and I take tests, I sit there and I just twiddle my thumb. Like, you can't focus at all. And so your temper is problems. Now as graduating, when I'm going in the job market now, and in 3 years I'm going to have to start paying for this on my own, which don't get me started on how expensive this stuff is. It's going to be a whole new ball game. And so all I'm saying is just to make lives, like Kuvan stepped my life way above where it was before. But now the next step is decrease the volume. Like, I can't sit here and take 4 more hours of each day taking these medications, gulping down 30 pills a day, and sitting here drinking this big shake of bland tasting stuff in order to survive. It sucks, but I mean, I will do it till the day I die because I can't go back to where it was. But just decreasing the volume, that would be the next progressive step that we could make in making lives better.
Thank you very much, Colin. Colin, right? Casey? Sorry. Thank you, Casey.
Can I add to Casey's comments?
Sure, Jennifer.
I think that he did a great job showing the issues with compliance of not only the diet, but also the pill burden with Kuvan. As you can see, it's life-changing for him. I'm not a consumer of Kuvan. You have to be tested to respond to the medication. But he makes a good point with the medical foods. This essentially it's medication. You have to take it religiously. You can, like I said earlier, to perform on a day-to-day basis. And that, just the slightest change in your Phe levels, you can feel the effects. And I just want to say, for me, the medical food is a treatment for me. For now, I'm a pharmacist. I need the utmost, attention, focus, and concentration, to do my job. But the point is, he points out some of the limitations with the diet, the high carb load. It's not perfect, but you know what? The diet got me through 3 pregnancies, 3 healthy children, and if that is not enough power, that's testimony to the power of the Phe-restricted diet right there.
Thank you so much. If you're looking at the agenda, don't be nervous. We get to keep going. We only need about 15 minutes for the public comment session, so we're going to keep going on this topic and stretch it out as much as we can. If you have signed up for the public comment session, we're going to ask you to limit your remarks to 3 minutes, and we will be pretty tight on that 3 minutes because we do want to make sure we have since we're going to limit it to 15 minutes so that we can have this conversation go as long as possible. Are there any other treatments that you want to focus on before we go into a discussion on clinical trials? Yes, Julie.
Hi, I wanted to follow up on a comment that Ms. Hogan made earlier, and it's not necessarily about a specific treatment, but if I've quoted you correctly, you said there should be an expectation of expanded access past the initial safety trial. And if I could have you just explain a little bit more about what you mean. Do you mean that if someone's enrolled in a safety or efficacy trial and they have completed the trial through the time points for assessing safety and efficacy, that they should then allow to stay in the trial and get the treatment? Or do you mean that they can get off the trial and do something different?
Thanks for the question. No, I think the extension trial, obviously I think it's a no-brainer, but I think in these very severe degenerative diseases where you have a very short time frame in which to try to save your child, once a drug is shown to be even somewhat safe, I think it is incumbent upon industry to expect that the community, once they see that a drug is safe and has some level of efficacy, that patients are going to want to save their children. When my son is 7 and he's learning to snorkel right now and climbing rock walls and playing computer games, and his best friend is dying at the same age, that's a very difficult thing for a community to sit and accept when we see a drug that's shown safety and even at this point shown efficacy.
I think we'll delve a little further in this in a few minutes. Any other questions on any specific treatments or treatment types. We haven't been able to talk about the very important, more supportive care treatments, the other prescription medications that you've taken, the importance of, as we're hearing, the physical, occupational, and speech therapies and behavioral therapies. So we'll encourage you to share those experiences through the docket if you have a chance to submit additional comments. Any other comments on treatments on the web?
We have a web participant who mentioned his found patient, his son or daughter has Sanfilippo, and he treats the child with supplements, but there is no evidence that these actually work. They also are on a low sodium anti-inflammatory diet regimen, which has helped reduce the joint pain. That's it.
Thank you, Pujita. Okay, we want to make sure we get to follow up on the great comments that we heard from the panel on the informed consent and the clinical trial participation. So before we do that, we have a few polling questions just to understand the experiences and perspectives in the room and on the web. And the first one is, have you or your loved one ever participated in any type of clinical trial studying experimental treatments for IEM? Okay. Okay, so we have about a dozen of you in the room have not had any experience, and about 10 of you, I believe, had experience. On the web?
About 2 have had experience on the web.
Okay. Can I get a show of hands from those of you that have said no? Of those of you that said no, how many of you wanted to be in one and could not for some reason? Okay. So there's another polling question, and this is a very tough one, and believe me, no one's going to hold you to the responses of this. This just gives us a general sense of your thoughts toward clinical trials. Today, think about your situation today, you or your child's situation today. If you or your loved one had the opportunity to participate in a clinical trial to study an experimental treatment, let's think of something that's either a medical treatment or transplantation. Which of the following best describes your thoughts? Yes, of course it would depend on many factors, but I am generally willing to consider participating. No, I would probably not consider participating, or maybe I'm really not sure whether I would be generally willing to participate. All right. You made me read through all of these really tough response choices here. You could have just stopped me and said, that's a dumb question. On the web.
On the web, we actually have 85% who've said yes, 5% who said no, and then 10% who are unsure, uncertain.
If you're on the web, if you could provide a comment, if you were one of those that said generally no, about why. Okay. So we now have a sense of the perspective shared in the room. And then to follow up this discussion, I'm going to throw one more thing at you, which is a scenario, just to help set the stage. And when we answer the next questions, try to put yourself in this position, that you or your child has the opportunity to consider participating in a clinical trial for an experimental enzyme replacement therapy or something similar to that. That the clinical trial is a phase 1 first-in-human study involving approximately 10 patients, so it's never been studied in humans before. And for this trial, there is less animal data available to evaluate the safety than is typical for a first-in-human study of this type. Therefore, the benefits and the risks of this experimental treatment would be highly uncertain. So our question is, what thoughts first come to your mind when you hear this scenario? What questions would you have? So I'll open it up. I'll come out here first, and then we'll... Yep, right there.
Yeah, I think the key to that question is less than what is typical, because our understanding is that what is typical is killing lots of large mammals when that is unnecessary. So I think my thoughts on that is that, yes, it needs to be treated, tested in animals, and I don't think any of us are willing to do anything that's not, but it's the extent for these rare diseases of putting them through the same rigorous, thresholds that for something that's affecting a lot of diseases, when a lot of people, when ours is affecting fewer.
Thank you. Let's go to Roy, and then we'll go to Austin.
I think it would depend on a couple things. One, is there a reasonable treatment already available for the disease, right? I would accept more risk if there's nothing. And secondly, it would depend on where my child was in the course of the disease. If it was very early and young and there was hope that I could wait and see some data, then maybe I would sit on the sideline. But if the window is very short relative to the time of the trial, I would put him in, no doubt about it.
Okay, thank you. Julie, would you like to follow up?
I just wanted to clarify that maybe one of the ways that the amount of data is less comparable to what we're used to having is not so much the number of animals, but the duration of the animal's exposure. So, for example, if we would normally have a treatment in animals for 6 months, and in this case we only had 1 month of treatment, how would that impact your thinking about that? So we would not have very much experience with treatment over anything longer than, say, a month. How would people feel about that?
Austin, would you like to go? And then we'll go to
Thanks.
Tracy. I think there's a hand up over here.
Can you hear me? To me, so you've got two questions to ask, right? You have safety and efficacy. And it's been said many times here that, and I think everybody or most people in this room agree that safety is the primary thing you need to take a look at. I think we're all willing to take more risk. We have to. My son's going to live 3 more years. So what are you going to do? Sorry. I'm not in a riskier, I can't be in a riskier situation. Just give them a chance. Give these kids a chance.
Thank you, Austin. There was a hint. We'll go to Tracy first, and then we'll come up here to you.
I think I agree with the previous comments. Just give our kids a chance. To your question or statement about the animals in the genotype of these animals, are we seeing any improvement, even in the shorter time frame?
Oh, this was a scenario. So is that a question you would want to know about?
Well, the scenario was given to us by the panelists. I was asking the question. I need a little bit more information about that scenario to answer it.
Right. There would be one. Maybe you could answer. What I was getting at was the duration of treatment to assess safety. But maybe Donna, you can talk about the efficacy.
I was just going to say that if we were going into phase 1 in children, we have to have some sign, whether it's in some scientific rationale and proof that there is some hope of efficacy in the children. So in this scenario, yes, we would say that there is some evidence that there might be efficacy that would support going into the children. So what Dr. Bites was going after was the duration, because the duration in a treatment in these children with diseases that are lifelong diseases, the treatment would be expected to be as long as the child lived. And we learn in these animal studies what happens over time in the animals by they're sacrificed, and we look at their tissues to see what happened, to find out what we might be able to predict and what we should be looking for in the children for a toxicity. So that was the question about how how different parents might factor that information into a consent form about knowing what the amount is relative to what is usual in the long-term safety.
Okay, let me finish with this comment. A lot of our kids are dying. We aren't looking. They're dying. They're drowning in the middle of the ocean. We aren't looking for the Queen Mary to come by and take us to the next coast. We need a lifeboat. We may not expect to be on therapy for life because in a lot of these conditions, we know there's second generation treatments coming along. Give us the lifeboat, please.
We'll go here.
My name is Stephanie Bozarth, and my daughter has MPS 4. And actually, it's an inborn error of metabolism, but it doesn't typically affect the brain. So we are fortunate in that sense, but her life expectancy is still pretty short. So there are other parts of the inborn error of metabolism that will affect her long-term longevity. When it comes to this question, we do have experience with enzyme replacement therapies, and we do know from what we've seen in the past that when you're introducing a known protein into the body, there's a less probability of toxicity. I think there does need to be safety data, but where can we learn from what we've already been doing with enzyme replacement therapies and make that a little more concise so that we can get these therapies out quicker and sooner to the children? And like many of the other MPSs, time is not our friend. And my daughter did fortunately get in a clinical trial at the age of 5, but her growth plates would probably be dead by the age of 8, which she turned 8 a couple of weeks ago. So, you know, it really meant a lot to be able to get on that clinical trial as soon as possible. So I would absolutely, knowing what the risks were and that there was some safety and efficacy and that we've been doing enzyme replacement therapies for 10 years now, we know about them. So.
Okay, thank you very much. I just want to put a call out to the operator. If you could open the phone lines for anyone to give a final thought on the phone. I have a question I would like to follow up with, which is for those of you in the room, it's probably a smaller group of you, who have a child who could, because they're either old enough or they have some capacity to, could take part in the decision about whether to participate in a clinical trial. What is most important from your perspective to communicate, to address how the trial and informed consent is communicated to them? Maybe some different things than you've seen in your past experience. Steve?
We've been through clinical trials with our kids, both as minors and as adults. So we have so it's been handled differently in those situations. But even as a minor and as a child, I think involving them in the process at the level they're able to understand and getting them to sign on the paper so that they buy into it at the level they can is very important as far as down the road is, you know, when you're going through some of the constraints of the trial and the effort that it takes to be in it just to get them they're okay in it. But even in our case, our kids are somewhat or a little cognitively impaired. They still look to us as their parents to provide them that assurance and comfort. So I really think their buy-in is more just an add-on to the parents.
Okay, thank you. I see a lot of heads nodding. So we'll go with Christine, and then sir, did you have your hand up?
My 8-year-old was all ready to sign up for a clinical trial for PKU using the enzyme replacement therapy. And I mean, the clinical trial is for 18 and up. But he had an opportunity a couple years ago to meet somebody who was in the phase 2 trial. She laid out the shots for him. She laid out the thickness of that needle. And he said, you know what, Mom? I still want to do it. So I think that with kids, it's maybe showing them some of the things and what would be involved and how big that needle might be, or, you know, what the procedure actually looks like. You know, and if he had the opportunity and if he feels that strongly about it, you know, maybe down the road it's something that he can participate in.
Thank you, Christine. We're going to have to move on in the interest of time. Well, first of all, any pressing questions from the FDA panel? Okay. Yes, go ahead, Rachel.
Hi, my name is Rachel Witten. I'm from Gene and Cell Therapy Division. And you know, our products are different. When you give this product, you don't know how long it's present. It may, you know, die, and it's a life vector. And we don't know how long this the product is going to work. Maybe it's 1 month, maybe 2 years or 3 years. What we start doing recently, when we receive the protocol from the sponsor, we usually try to involve patient representative. You're going to start, we ask the patient representative, start with us with pre-IND meeting. Look at the protocol, read the consent form, and go through the protocol and let us know, will you enroll your child in this clinical trial? But what happened, we regulate a lot of rare diseases, but sometimes we just cannot find patient representative who will work with us. And at this point, we do need your help.
Okay. So I will put a shout out for our colleagues in the Office of Health and Constituent Affairs who helps organize the patient representative program that Rachel is talking about. And if you are interested, if you haven't made a connection yet with FDA, look up the patient representative program and reach out to one of our colleagues in that office. There's a way to do it that's explained on the website. Okay. We have one person on the phone. We'd like to. Operator?
If you'd like to make a comment on the phone lines, your lines are now open.
Hello? Hello? Yes, good morning.
Hello.
Hello, we can hear you.
Thank you. This is Joyce Wolf. I'm the mother of 2 sons with Zellweger syndrome. They basically have liver disease, adrenal insufficiency, deaf blindness, myelin abnormalities and delays, seizures, muscle weakness, cognitive issues, behavior and sleep problems, bowel and bladder control issues, balance and walking problems. My sons are given 6 months to live, and there's no cure. The clinical trials that we are involved in the U.S. are the cholic acid for bile acid deficiency, and in Europe, the DHA ethyl ester for the DHA deficiency. The cholic acid trial in the United States was quite easy and well managed, and we had no problems with compliance. The Europe trial, we made 18 trips to Europe until the research physician passed away. And when we were unable to give the DHA ethyl ester, we saw a drop in the plasmalogens, an increase in liver enzyme function tests, regression in physical performance, weight loss, and inability to absorb fat-soluble vitamins, increase in irritability, decrease in appetite, and increase in apnea and seizures. The DHA is not available in the United States, but it should be, since our children have difficulties breaking down the common triglyceride form of DHA, and the research that was done abroad shows remarkable benefits, improvement in liver function, myelination, vision, muscle tone, and overall health. The questions that I would ask my children if they wanted to be involved in a clinical trial is they are both so anxious to be well, to have lives that are not affected by deaf blindness and poor muscle control and deterioration in their condition, that they would do anything that showed a small amount of hope for them to continue to live a profitable life. And I really agree with the comment that was made that our children are dying, and we need the kind of help that is already out there to be brought to the United States, and to use what we have in the United States as well to have it through the FDA to be available for our other children that will come along and can be treated as soon as possible. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And what was your name again?
Joyce Wolf.
Joyce. Thank you, Joyce. Well, we are to the end of our time for this discussion. Of course, it could keep going. There's so many other things to talk about. We didn't get to touch upon challenges in eligibility criteria, for example, for those of you that wanted to participate in trials and haven't been able to, or in other issues such as awareness or other issues related to clinical trials or the other treatments that you're taking. Again, we have the docket, and we really encourage you to contribute to the docket. With that, I'm going to turn this over to Pujita, who's going to do the open public comment.
Hello, everyone. I'd like to thank you all for coming today. We are now moving into the open public comment session, and for those of you who are not aware, the purpose of this session is to allow an opportunity for those who have not had a chance to speak on issues that are not related to our two main discussion topics. This is an opportunity for folks who are not patients or patient representatives to comment. Please keep in mind that we will not be responding to your comments, but they will be transcribed and be part of the public record. Since we would like this to be a transparent process, we encourage you to note any financial interests that you have that are related to your comment. If you do not have such interests, you may state that for the record, and if you prefer not to provide this information, you can still provide your comments. So we have collected signups before the meeting and during the break. In the interest of time, we have six people signed up for this session, so please be respectful for your other colleagues here and other patients, and stick to the 2 to 3 minute limit that we have. We won't have a timer, but I will be keeping track of time. So if you approach the 2 to 3 minutes, I will ask you to start wrapping up. So I'll quickly run through the order of speakers, and I apologize if I mispronounce your name. We have first Austin Knoll, second Paige Migliozzi, Eduardo Balcells, Christy Balcells, William Nehan, and Jana Monaco. So could we please have Austin Knoll to the mic, please?
I've pulled it together. Just a quick follow-up comment, and it's on the safety versus efficacy weighting. You need to think about that because efficacy is inherently extremely difficult with this patient population. You know, I can take 10 kids with Sanfilippo who are my son's age. They're all going to be different. And my son is different every day. So if you wait forever to figure out efficacy, we got a huge problem. You really need to take a look at safety, and then efficacy will come as we get things out. Thanks.
Thank you, Austin. Next, could we have Paige?
My name's Paige Migliozzi. My son Christopher had MPS 1 Hurler syndrome. Last night, my 8-year-old daughter cried in my arms, putting herself to sleep, because her brother died 10 years ago tomorrow from Hurler syndrome. So tomorrow marks a whole decade of my life that I have been without my son. My 7-year-old son, when he goes to school and they talk about superheroes, he comes home and says, "Mama, I wish I could be a superhero so I could undead my brother and so he could come and play with me." I want you all to know the work you do is so important. There are families out there, there are real people who need your help and need your cure. Christopher was one of the first people to undergo enzyme replacement therapy in addition to chemotherapy and transplant. And we've talked about transplants, and transplants have a lot of problems. They're not to be taken lightly, and he died of post-transplant complications. I only had him for 14 months, but I've spent the past 10 years grieving his death. So on behalf of me and my family, I want you to know we need you because we need hope. These kids are running against an invisible clock. We all are. So thank you for all the work that you do. And remember, we need you. We need that hope for our children. Thank you.
Thank you, Paige. Next, we have Eduardo.
Thank you again for the opportunity to participate in this wonderful event. Again, my daughter has mitochondrial disease, Lay's disease specifically. She's our youngest daughter. My background, I'm a physician, so one of the things that I go through that's striking for me is that in my world of patient care, I have a list of, my patients come in and they have a list of medications they're on the average of 8 to 12. In my daughter's case, she has no proven therapies, no proven treatments. Some comments on some of the previous comments made this during the previous discussion. It's important for us to realize that without opening up the access to patients for studies, that we as parents have to resort to unproven therapies, anecdotal treatment. And that carries risk in and of itself. So for my daughter, she's on a host of compounded pharmacy vitamins, cofactors, which are compounded. But again, that's not regulated. I don't know exactly what she's getting. We believe it's helping her. So, but we are resorting to anecdotal care. And it's striking to me that, you know, in many of the adult chronic conditions, we do a very good job with our studies, and patients have choices. So there's 5 different types of hypertensive medications or cholesterol medications. And again, in our space, we have no therapies. So I would ask that we, when we look at our children and adults with these types of diseases, that we maybe perhaps look at it through a different lens. And as I was mentioned before, safety is key, but perhaps that risk is with not a capital R, but a small r. Because really, without anything to offer our kids, again, we're left to anecdotal care. And that's a difficult situation to be in. So thank you.
Thank you, Eduardo. Next, we have Christy.
I also wanted to thank NORD, the National Organization for Rare Diseases, for having us here today, because we would not have known about this meeting had it not been for them and their support. Again, my name is Christy. I'm the Executive Director of Mito Action, which is a national mitochondrial disease organization, and I'll speak as a mother as well as a national patient advocate in saying that the inclusion criteria and the endpoints, which make for good published data, don't really matter to us. What matters to us is what you heard today. What matters to us is if my daughter is so shaky that I have to sit and feed her every bite of her yogurt, or if she can feed herself. What matters to us is whether our kids are able to sleep through the night so that everybody in the family can have a little bit of peace. What matters to us is whether we feel like we're at the doctor every week or if we're at the doctor every couple of months. These things have huge impacts on our quality of life, but they don't make good publishable graphs, right? But they make real differences in the lives of our kids and in the lives of those that we love that have these diseases. The second thing that I would say is that I would not have known about this meeting, and will certainly pay much more attention to the patient voice opportunities within the FDA had it not been for NORD. But as the director of a national organization, please, FDA, reach out to us. We're coming to you with these comments, but certainly I feel that any of us who are here today representing patient advocacy groups would jump at the chance to have our comments be heard. So please find us. We are all using social media. So it's pretty actually easy for our patients to find us when they're facing that diagnosis. I believe that you could also, and we really want that opportunity to share our voice. Thank you.
Thank you, Christy. Next, we have William Nyhan.
Yes, I'm a little different. I'm a physician, professor of pediatrics at the University of California. I've been around, I'm happy to say, long enough so that I've witnessed the initial description of most of the diseases we're talking about here, and certainly all of the ones that have been defined on an enzymatic basis, and in fact a handful of those we've been the people that found those defects. I'm really delighted with what we've known to have accomplished so far, but I think that there also is a future. I mean, I don't think that there's going to be more in the terms of dietary restriction. I think we probably know as much as we're going to know about that. But I think there are new and different drug possibilities along the line. Among them, I'd like to point out the development of nitisinone. That came from a biochemist in Canada who was studying this stuff that was developed as a rat poison. And he found the enzyme that it inhibited, and as soon as we knew what enzyme that was, it became apparent that this was a treatment for tyrosinemia, which was killing kids and destroying their brains, very largely in Canada, but throughout the United States and the world. Now, that's an effective treatment, and we've also discovered that it's an even more effective treatment for alkaptonuria, a crippling disease of adults. Finally, I would say that in terms of clinical pharmacology and the study of the mechanism of drug action, we're beginning to learn that drugs, even those already on the market, are having effects on areas of metabolism that point out that they may, in fact, be effective treatments for a particular disease. And so I'm hopeful that there's going to be more of that.
Thank you, William. And lastly, we have Jana Monaco.
Again, I'm the advocacy liaison with the Organic Acidemia Association. And those of us who are parents with these children and young adults living with these disorders, like the other mom, our anniversary was 13 years ago last week that my son was diagnosed with his disorder, isovaleric acidemia. And when you look at your child, any of us know that if you look at your child who is in a coma on life support, who was running around playing with toys the day before, or have slowly deteriorated over time for unknown reasons, you almost are willing to do anything and everything because you have nothing else to lose. And so in the 13 years that we have been dealing with life after my son's diagnosis, I have been with families who have shared similar stories, who have lost their children, and some of us have learned, and through, for example, like children like my daughter who came along a year after my son, because of what we knew. They are perfect examples of the pros and cons and what education does for rare diseases and these IEMs and what can be done. And research prior to his diagnosis has helped many along the way, and there are far less children and young adults living with the severe disabilities that my son Stephen has, and more thriving like my daughter Caroline. And it is the effective treatment that they are on, and the studies that have been done to look at that, and they're doing well. However, for those of us with IMs, know that the very medical foods and formulas and supplements aren't even really recognized yet as true treatments to be even get that authorization to be funded for. So families suffer, they struggle to have access to it and the funding for it, and they will compromise, unfortunately, sometimes. So we need to be able to address what's right there before our eyes and get that these medical foods and formulas are the elephant in the room, and no one seems to be able to move them beyond stagnation and know what to do with it in healthcare reform. And last but not least, my children are in a few different studies right now at NIH and at Children's National to study these disorders a little bit more and understanding how they affect them nutritionally and for immune sensitivities and so forth, because the fact that we know that they are lifelong, and we have to look beyond the early diagnosis years and how these disorders affect them throughout their life cycle. And as far as consent, my daughter, who is 11, is part of the decision to participate in these research studies because she knows she does not want to get sick like her brother, and he is a constant and daily reminder to her of what can happen if that doesn't take place. So thank you for your support in these conditions.
Thank you, Jenna. Thank you, everyone. And I would like to quickly remind you to pass your clickers to the end of the rows, and we'll ask some FDA folks to pick it up. And now I'd like to call Dr. Teresa Baracchio to the stand for our closing.
So I'd like to just start by thanking all of the patients and families who came today. I know many of you traveled long distances to come here. We are very grateful that you were willing to share your experiences and your stories with us. They're very moving, and we're taking it all to heart. So just to summarize what we heard today, in our first topic, we talked a bit broadly about the different types of neurologic symptoms that many of you are experiencing. I think one of the things that came up is one of the most distressing symptoms was loss of language and being nonverbal. We hear that the frustration with the inability to communicate may, in fact, lead to some of the behavioral problems that you're seeing, and that there is great frustration on both sides with inability to express pain that the patient might be having or any distress that they might be experiencing. And of course, we understand that there's great heartbreak at no longer being able to hear your child's voice. Other things that came up as being quite important were, of course, cognition. I think that wasn't too much of a surprise. We knew that that is a widespread problem across all of these diseases. And particularly this discussion of executive function came up. And then the challenges with dealing with troubling behaviors, things that like impulsivity and aggression and some socially inappropriate behaviors. But just really the main goal with those behaviors is that you want your children to be safe and not engage in unsafe behaviors, and that you ideally want to be able to continue to do the daily tasks that you need to do, like go to the store. I think one of the new things for me hearing today was this, some of the psychiatric symptoms, that anxiety came up several times. Also, the symptom of psychosis with delusions and hallucinations was a new one for me to hear about. And this idea of emotional regulation, that the children can go from laughing to crying pretty quickly. I saw a lot of nodding heads to that particular symptom. And sleep, insomnia, or night terrors or sleepwalking. We want to encourage you to continue to tell us more people who didn't get to speak today or people who are on the phone. Do go to that docket and enter, greater, we covered a lot of these broadly and we didn't get to dig too deeply, so please go back, write it out, send it in to us. We want to hear more. And the second, and then I should also mention that there was a really great question that came up with, we're hearing all these symptoms, so how do we measure these things? And that is a problem that we all struggle with. There are some scales that exist for some of these, but they haven't really been used in these populations per se. But I think the first step into developing these scales is to know what the problems are in the first place. So we made some important first steps here today to get to that point where we can develop some scales to hopefully capture some of these symptoms. In the second part of our discussion today, we touched on the therapies that are available and what different people's experiences have been with those therapies. I think we can all agree that the therapies are limited and there needs to be more options. I think there's general consensus here that you want the opportunities to be involved in clinical trials and that you are willing to take on some risks, although those risks will vary for individuals and also depends on other therapies that may be available for the disease. But overall, I think we had a great discussion today. It was very informative, very productive talk. So I'd like to just wrap up with some additional thank yous. So once again, thank you to all the families who participated. And thank you to everyone else who participated, either by phone or in person. I want to
also thank the organizers of this, Sarah Eggers and Pujita Vaidya did a great job of organizing this, and the support of our division leadership with Donna Griebel, Andrew Mulberg, who couldn't be here today but was very invested in this, Julie Bites, and Amy Egan. And also thank you to NORD. I know that NORD provided transportation costs for some of the people who were able to come here, so thank you very much for that. And with that, I think we can end.
Thank you very much, Teresa, and she has summed it up for all of us, I think, in her thank you and in her summary. I just have one kind of business thing, which is if you haven't completed an evaluation form, we would very much appreciate your thoughts on how the meeting went today. It's a one-page form, so if you could fill it out and leave it for us. And with that, we'll thank you again for traveling here and for being here with us and sharing your experiences and perspectives. Thank you very much.
I'm going to try to get a picture of all the MPS folks at some point. Did she say that? Okay. Great minds think alike.